I have told this story only twice in my life, once to a man I trusted, and once to a fire. But Aldrich himself, when I press him now, says only that I tell it better than he does, and so I tell it again here as truthfully as I can, for those who were not there to see what happened on the afternoon that the Duke of Ravenscroft walked into Aldenmere House and changed everything. My name is Crispin Hale. I had been Aldrich Vane's closest friend since boyhood, the one quiet constant in a life that had otherwise shaped itself around power and reputation, and the cold, efficient exercise of both. He was not a cruel man, though the county took him for one. He was, rather, a precise man, and precision in a duke reads as cruelty to those who prefer sentiment to structure. He had no patience for performance, no appetite for flattery, and a zero tolerance for the particular rot of certain old families who lived off the desperation of others and called it society. That last quality is the one that matters here. It was February, the kind that bit through stone walls, when word reached us that Lord Morrow of Fenwick had finally run himself to the end of his rope. I had heard the name before, a charming fool, everyone said, a man who could lose a fortune at cards and explain it beautifully while the cards were still warm. He had lost 3, as it turned out. The last one had taken the house, the carriage, horses, and very nearly the coat off his own back. What it had also taken, by the terms of certain agreements made in the small hours of a gaming parlor in the north, was his eldest daughter. By a contract he had signed with a creditor named Finch, who dealt in the sort of arrangement that polite society pretended did not exist, and then attended whenever they could get an invitation. The auction was being held at Aldenmere House, which belonged to a cousin of Finch's and was neutral ground, as these things went. I will not pretend the practice was unknown. Marriage contracts sold for debt were not common, but they were not impossible, and men like Finch had perfected the art of making them just respectable enough to draw a room. There were 8 men in that room when Aldrich and I arrived. I had come because Aldrich rarely went anywhere alone if I could help it, and because something in the letter he had shown me, a note from his own solicitor, flagging the contract's particulars, had made the back of my neck feel cold. Elise Morrow was standing near the far window when we came in. I use the word standing, but it is not quite right. She was composed. That is the word I would reach for if I could choose only one. The room was full of men who were pretending not to look at her directly, and she was looking straight at the rain on the glass and refusing to pretend anything at all. She wore gray wool, plain and brushed, and her hair was simply pinned. She had not dressed to please this room, and something about that decision, deliberate, quiet, inviolable, struck me like a blow to the chest. She was perhaps 22. Her face was serious and clear-eyed. There was no fear in it, or rather the fear was somewhere underneath, controlled absolutely, and what showed on the surface was a kind of still dignity that I have rarely seen in men twice her age who had never faced a fraction of what she was facing. I watched Aldrich look at her. He did it the way he looked at everything, briefly, quietly, with that total attention he brought to things that mattered. Then he looked away, but his jaw had set differently. Finch was the sort of man who had made a study of his own blandness. He came forward, shook hands, explained the particulars with the practiced ease of someone describing the sale of a parcel of land rather than a woman. The contract covered 1 year of lawful marriage, after which the lady might be released with a settlement, or the match continued by mutual agreement. There was a floor bid. There were terms. He said all of this in a pleasant, informational voice while Elise stood at the window and the rain came down. I did not look at her again. I watched Aldrich. He had not moved. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, head slightly bowed, in the posture he used when he was thinking. The other men were murmuring to each other, looking the situation over the way they looked over bloodstock or property. I heard one of them, a round-faced baronet named Fallow, make a low remark to his neighbor that I will not repeat here. Aldrich heard it too. His head came up. He looked at Fallow for exactly 2 seconds and Fallow stopped talking. The bidding opened. Fallow went first. Another man, a solicitor's widower named Grays, who had a reputation for acquiring things, went second. There was a minor lord from the border counties who raised it twice in quick succession, and 2 others I did not know who took it higher still. The room had a particular quality to it, airless and overheated, and I found I was watching the window, watching Elise watching the rain. She did not flinch at the numbers. I think that was the moment it happened, if I had to name one. Not that I could see it on Aldrich's face. He never gave you his face, not fully. But there was a stillness that came over him that I recognized. I had seen it before, twice. Once when he discovered that a bailiff under his employ had been taking rents from tenants who had nothing left to give, and once when a man at a dinner in London said something unspeakable about a woman who was not there to answer for herself. Both times, the stillness preceded something irreversible. 1,000 guineas, said the Duke of Ravenscroft. The room went quiet. Not silent, quiet, the way a room goes quiet when it does not know what to do with the thing that has just entered it. 1,000 guineas was more than twice what Fallow had offered, and it landed on the floor of the room with the weight of a stone dropped from height. Finch blinked. Fallow turned in his chair. The man from the border counties let out a low, involuntary sound. Grays, whose face had the leathery patience of a man who had outlasted many things, said, 1,200. 1,500, said Aldrich, and his voice had not changed in the slightest. Grays set down his gloves. 1,550. 2,000, said Aldrich, and we are finished. We were finished. No one else bid. I cannot say whether it was the number or the voice or the way the Duke of Ravenscroft looked when he said a thing was finished. The room gathered its coats and its dignity and its low opinions and slowly, without making eye contact, cleared. Finch made arrangements with a speed that suggested he had hoped the whole business would be over quickly. The contract changed hands. Money was settled. Papers were signed in a side room. I waited in the hall. After some time, Aldrich came out, and Elise Morrow was with him. She was still composed. She carried a small traveling case and a winter cloak, and she walked with her head up, not looking at me or the hall or the house, but looking forward at the distance, the way people look when they are navigating something they cannot yet see the end of. Aldrich said to me very quietly, "We are going home." I did not say anything. There are times in a friendship when the only right response is silence and a steadying presence, and I have learned over the years which times those are. The carriage ride to Ravenscroft was 3 hours. I sat opposite them. Elise said very little, and Aldrich said almost nothing, which was not unusual for him, but which felt, in that particular silence, weighted. Once she looked out at the winter fields going past, and I saw his gaze move to her profile and stay there for a moment, and then return to the window on his side. She caught me watching and did not look away. She had that quality, the ability to hold a gaze without aggression or submission, simply clear-eyed and even. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Miss Morrow, is he always this quiet?" I considered the question seriously. "No," I said, "usually he has opinions." The corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the beginning of one, and under the circumstances it was remarkable. Aldrich did not look over, but I thought I saw his jaw loosen fractionally. Ravenscroft in February is a forbidding thing. The estate is vast and gray-stoned and built for a family that did not flinch from cold, and the drive through the gates in February light makes most people go quiet. Elise looked at it through the carriage window without any of the usual responses, the sharp intake of breath at the scale, the slight shrinking that I had seen in people who came here for the first time. She looked at it the way she had looked at the rain, directly, calmly, taking its measure. Mrs. Pelham, the housekeeper, met us at the door and showed Elise to the rooms that had been readied, a fire already laid, the linens turned down. Aldrich stood in the hall and watched her go up the stairs and said nothing. I said nothing either. That evening at dinner, he sat at the head of the long table in the dining room, and she sat at the far end, and neither of them spoke for the first quarter of an hour. I sat to the side and ate my soup, and watched them not speaking with the focused interest of a man who has known Aldrich Vane for 30 years and has never seen him not speak before. Then she said, "You could have bid less." He looked up. 2,000 was substantially more than anyone else offered, she said. "You could have had the contract for 1,250, I expect, if you had waited." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "I was not interested in waiting," he said. "Why not?" He looked at her. It was a longer look than most people got from him, and most people found his sustained attention unsettling. She did not. "Because Grays was going to get there eventually," he said, "and I did not want that to happen." She absorbed this. "You know him." "I know of him, that was sufficient." She looked down at her plate and then back up. "And now that you have the contract," she said, "what do you intend to do with it?" "Honor it," he said. "Its terms are simple enough. A year's lawful marriage, after which you have every option. I will not hold you to more." She did not answer immediately. I was watching her face, the quality of her thinking, the way she received information without rushing past it toward reaction. "And in the year," she said, "what will you require of me?" "Nothing beyond what is decent," he said. "You are not a servant. You are not an obligation. You may use this house as your own, receive guests if you wish, ride the estate, have access to the library. It is a good library. Mrs. Pelham will assist you with anything you need. I will not trouble you with my schedule unless courtesy requires it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are a very strange man, Your Grace." "So I am told," he said, and returned his attention to his dinner. "I thought something is happening here that neither of them has named yet, and I will be very careful not to get in the way of it." The first weeks were outwardly quiet. Aldrich had his affairs to manage, the estate, a parliamentary matter, a long-standing dispute with a neighbor over water rights that had consumed him for 2 years, and he absorbed himself in them. Elise found the library on the third day and spent a morning there so absorbed that she did not hear the bell for luncheon, and Mrs. Pelham sent me to find her. She was sitting cross-legged on the hearthrug with a volume of natural history open across her knees, her shoes left abandoned by the nearest shelf, her hair escaping its pins, her face entirely unguarded in the way that a person's face goes when they have forgotten to maintain it. I was quiet. I backed out without disturbing her. I told Mrs. Pelham that Miss Morrow would take luncheon in the library. That evening Aldrich asked me, in his usual sideways way, never direct about the things that cost him something, whether she had found the house acceptable. "She found the library acceptable," I said. He was quiet then. "Which section?" "Natural history," though she had also pulled 3 volumes of early Italian poetry from the far shelf and left them stacked by the window. He looked at me for a moment. "She reads Italian," he said. "Apparently." He went back to his papers and said nothing more. But the following morning, when I came down to breakfast, I found him at the library door with a key in his hand and a slightly defensive expression on his face, unlocking a cabinet in the east wall that had been locked for as long as I had been coming to Ravenscroft. "What is in that cabinet?" I asked. "Maps," he said, "and some correspondence in early Venetian dialect. I thought she might find it interesting." He said it the way he said everything, flatly, without inflection, as though the gesture were purely practical. I said, "Of course." "Don't read into it, Crispin." "I never read into anything." He closed the cabinet door without locking it again. I noticed he did not take the key. The trouble arrived, as trouble tends to from outside. Lord Fallow and 2 of the men who had been at Aldenmere House that afternoon were acquainted with a set of people in the county who had opinions about everything and the leisure to express them at length. The nature of the contract, that Elise had been purchased, as some of them chose to put it, was the kind of information that traveled fast and got worse with each telling. By the time it reached the drawing rooms of the local gentry, it had acquired embellishments I will not dignify by repeating, and Elise's name was being spoken in a register that made my teeth ache. She knew she was not a woman who failed to notice things. I saw it in the particular stillness she adopted when certain subjects came near her, the faint tightening at the corners of her mouth when a caller left a card and then failed to follow it with a call. She did not speak of it to me, and she did not speak of it to Aldrich, or at least I thought she had not. I was wrong. I found out what had happened the evening of the Thistleby dinner, which was the first formal occasion since Elise's arrival, and to which Aldrich had committed some months prior. He had asked her, with that careful correctness he maintained around her, whether she would prefer to attend or remain at home. She had said she would attend. And so we arrived at Thistleby Hall, the 3 of us, and walked into a room that had been very carefully arranged to convey, through the geometry of turned shoulders and directed conversation, that Elise Morrow was not worth talking to. It was beautifully done, in the way that only people with long practice in cruelty can manage. She was not excluded from the room. She was included in every superficial way, introduced, offered wine, positioned near conversations, and then systematically not addressed, not consulted, not made to feel that her answers were wanted. Lady Thistleby smiled at her twice, with precisely the warmth of midwinter glass. Elise was entirely composed. She stood and listened, and answered the few questions put to her with calm and intelligence, and showed nothing of what it cost her. I was watching Aldrich. He had seen it within 10 minutes of entering. I know because I know him. He tracked it the way he tracked everything, not with visible reaction, but with a deepening stillness, the quality of air before a change in weather. He spoke to his host. He accepted a drink. He moved through the social architecture of the evening with the ease of a man who has never in his life needed a room to like him. And then, midway through the dinner, Lady Thistleby said something to the woman on her left, not quite quietly enough, about women who come to a duke's table by purchase, and the class of persons one could expect from that kind of arrangement. The table was not large. Several people heard. Elise heard. She did not react. She sat very straight, and she cut her meat, and she said nothing, and that particular quality of her endurance, the absolute refusal to be diminished, was the most dignified thing I have ever seen at a dinner table. Aldrich set down his glass. "Lady Thistleby," he said. The table shifted. It was the voice he used when something was finished. "Your Grace," she said pleasantly, "you made an observation a moment ago about the character of persons at this table." A silence gathered. "I spoke carelessly," Lady Thistleby said, with the practiced ease of a woman who has never once spoken carelessly in her life. "You did," said Aldrich. "I'll ask you to consider what careless speech costs at your own table when the person you have addressed is a woman of greater intelligence, clearer principles, and more genuine worth than anyone I have met this evening, and when she is also my wife." The last two words fell into the silence and did not dissipate. I watched Lady Thistleby work out what to do with her face. I watched the woman on her left find her wineglass extremely interesting. I watched Lord Thistleby clear his throat and refill his glass, and say something to the man at his right about the weather. Elise did not look at Aldrich, but her fork paused, and then she set it down very quietly and looked up, and across the table her eyes found his, and for one moment which I will remember for the rest of my life, something in her face went absolutely still, and then, softly, without performance, released. He looked back at her steadily. He did not look away. We left Thistleby Hall before the port. In the carriage, none of us spoke for some time. The night was clear and cold, the stars very sharp, and Aldrich sat opposite us with his hands on his knees and his gaze going somewhere beyond the window. Then Elise said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, "I did." Another silence. "You called me your wife. You are my wife by lawful contract." "That is not what I meant." He looked at her. "No," he said after a moment, "it isn't." I found a great interest in the view from my own window, and made no contribution to the conversation. "What did you mean," she said, "when you said greater worth than anyone you had met this evening?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the road curved and the lights of a village came and went and fell behind us. "I meant it literally," he said. "I am not given to decorative speech." "No," she said. "I don't think you are." "I have watched you for 7 weeks," he said, "and I have not once seen you diminish yourself to accommodate a room. I have not once seen you offer less than you are because someone expected less of you. You read Italian poetry and the history of marine shells, and you have not once asked me whether you are here for good, because you are too clear-eyed to ask a question you cannot make yourself need the answer to yet. That is not the behavior of a woman without worth. It is the behavior of a woman with more of it than she has been given credit for, in this county or in any other." She was very still. "You counted the weeks," she said. 7, he said. "Yes." I looked very carefully at the dark fields. "Aldrich," I said without turning. "Don't, Crispin. I was only going to suggest." "No." I closed my mouth, but I was smiling, and I did not entirely manage to hide it, and when Elise looked at me she saw it, and something came into her face that was not quite a smile either, but that same beginning of one that I had seen in the carriage on the way to Ravenscroft, on a different day that felt very long ago. The weeks after Thistleby were different. Not dramatically, Aldrich was not a dramatic man, but the particular correctness he had maintained between them, that careful distance he kept like a man mindful of not overstepping terms he had set himself, shifted. He began to take his morning coffee in the library. He asked her opinion on the water rights dispute, and she gave it with a precision that made him go quiet and then ask a follow-up question, and they talked for an hour while I pretended to read a newspaper. She began to leave the Italian poetry volumes on his desk. He did not mention them, but he read them. I know because I found him one afternoon in the library, standing at the window with one of the volumes open in his hands, his coffee gone cold on the side table, and he was reading with the particular stillness that he brought to things that moved him, which was not many things. He did not hear me come in. He read for a long moment, and then he closed the book and stood looking at the winter garden, and his face in profile had something in it that I had not seen since, I do not know when. Since before his father died, perhaps. Since before Ravenscroft became a burden and a proof of something rather than a home. I backed out of the room and left him there. March came, and with it a letter from Lord Morrow. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed to Elise in care of the Duke of Ravenscroft, and she took it and read it in the hall and then stood with it in her hand for a long moment before she folded it and went to find Aldrich. I was in the study with him when she came in. She asked, without preamble, whether the terms of her father's original debt had been fully discharged by the contract. Aldrich told her they had been. She asked whether there was any remaining claim Finch or any associated party held over her father's properties. Aldrich said there was not. He had settled the outstanding accounts in full when he paid for the contract, a detail he had not mentioned to anyone. She was very still. "You paid his debts," she said. "It was cleaner," he said. "It was more than 2,000 guineas. "I am awares." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because you were not the one who owed them." She was quiet for long enough that I began to feel I was in the wrong room. Then she said, "My father writes to say that the house at Fenwick has been restored to him. He does not know how. He imagines a banker has been mistaken." "Bankers are mistaken sometimes," said Aldrich. "Aldrich. Elise." It was the first time I had heard him use her given name. He used it the way he said everything, without ornament, as though the word itself were enough, as though he had been saving it for a moment when it would land with its full weight. She took a breath. "You bought me," she said, "and then you freed my father, and you have never once treated me as anything other than a person of the first consequence in this house, and you gave my name at a dinner where no one else would give it, and you have been counting the weeks." She paused. "What is it you want, Your Grace?" He looked at her, that full, steady, unhurried attention of his. "For you to stay," he said, "not because the contract says so, because I am asking." The study was very quiet. Outside, the first of the spring rooks were calling from the elm trees, and the light through the window was beginning to go that thin gold color that means the worst of winter has broken. "And if I say no," she said, "then I will honor the original terms. 6 months from now you leave with a full settlement, your father's house restored, and the acknowledgement of this house behind you." He paused. "I will miss you. I will not hold you." She looked at him for a very long time. 7 weeks, she said. "Yes. You have been counting from the beginning." "From the carriage," he said. "You asked whether I was always this quiet." The corner of her mouth moved. "You weren't quiet that night at Thistleby," she said. "No," he said, "I wasn't." She stepped forward and took the Italian poetry volume from his desk. He had been reading it when she came in, I realized, though he had set it down when she entered, and held it a moment, looking at it. "My mother used to read me the Venetian dialogues," she said. "When I was small, I have not thought of them in years." She looked up. "The cabinet in the library, you left it unlocked." "I know. You intended me to find the maps." "I intended you to have access to them," he said carefully. "Whether you found them was your own affair." She held the book for a moment longer. Then she set it back on his desk very gently and looked at him. "Yes," she said. He did not ask her to clarify. He did not move immediately. He stood and held her gaze, and something in him that had been held very correctly at a distance for a long time came, slowly and visibly, undone. Not spectacularly, not with any great drama, but the way a long-closed room opens when someone finally remembers the window. The light comes in and the air changes, and suddenly you cannot imagine how you breathed in there before. I stood up quietly. "I will go and tell Mrs. Pelham," I said, "that there will be 3 at dinner indefinitely." Neither of them looked at me. I went and told Mrs. Pelham. She said, with the dignity of a woman who had been housekeeper at Ravenscroft for 23 years, and had waited considerably longer than 7 weeks to see this particular expression on the Duke's face. Thank goodness. I agreed with her entirely. The months that followed I will not detail extensively, because the particulars belong to them and not to me. What I can tell you is what I saw, and what I saw was this. Ravenscroft, which had been a house that worked perfectly and felt like no one's home, became a house where someone lived in it. Where there were books left open on chairs and Italian phrases appearing in the margins of the water rights correspondence, and the long south gallery used for walking in the evenings. 2 people side by side, the Duke of Ravenscroft and the woman his county had written off, going through the length of the gallery and back again in the good dusk while I sat in the library and listened to them through the wall and heard not what they said, but that they were saying things, and then that one of them was laughing, and that the other's voice went soft when it responded. By the time the year's contract ran out, no one mentioned it. I do not think either of them remembered the date. I did not remind them. What I remember instead is the morning of the spring races, the county assembled on the long lawn at Ashford Park, and Elise coming down the steps of the carriage in a pale green gown that Mrs. Pelham had quietly arranged, her hair dressed properly for the first time since I had known her, and Aldrich turning and looking at her, not the way a man looks at something that belongs to him, but the way a man looks at the thing he is most grateful for, which is a different and better thing. And offering her his arm, and the county watching, because the county always watched everything, and Elise taking his arm and lifting her head and walking with him across the lawn without looking at a single person who was watching. Only once, near the end of the afternoon, when Fallow passed close enough to nod, I saw her eyes cut briefly to Aldrich's face. He saw it. He said nothing to Fallow, nothing aloud at all. He merely moved 1 inch closer to her, his hand briefly over hers on his arm, and she looked forward again and left Fallow to whatever accounting he chose to make of that. After the races, driving home, she said, "He looked as though he wanted to say something." "Fallow always looks as though he wants to say something," said Aldrich. "I find it useful to let him arrive at the conclusion that he doesn't." She turned to look out the window, and I saw the smile this time, full and unguarded, the one she had been withholding in various degrees since February, and I thought of all the rooms she had stood in that had tried to tell her she was worth very little. I thought of the number Aldrich had said into the silence of Aldenmere House, 2,000 guineas, and we are finished. He had not been talking about the price. I understand that now in a way I perhaps did not fully understand it on the day. He had been talking about the practice, the whole dark-humored, respectable-faced system of it, the Finches and the Fallows and the rooms that turned their shoulders, and Elise standing at a rain-gray window with her chin up, worth more than every man in that room combined, and not one of them with the sense or the honor to say so. Except one. He said it then with a number. He said it again at Thistleby with words. He has been saying it every day since in the language that costs the most, which is not money or public defense but daily, unspectacular, entirely dependable devotion. The unlocked cabinet, the coffee in the library, the 7 weeks counted from the first question she asked, the way he says her name when there is no audience. The contract ran its year. No one marked the day. Ravenscroft is a warmer house now. The south gallery echoes with footsteps in the evening, and the long dining table has been replaced with a shorter one, and there are spring flowers on the study windowsill that I suspect arrived through the garden door with mud still on their stems and no explanation. I take my tea there most mornings when I visit, which is often. I sit in the library and I listen to the house, to the voices from the south gallery, to the sound of a door opening in the east wing, to the rooks in the elm trees, and I think of a February afternoon and a room full of men who calculated what a woman was worth in guineas, and got the number wrong in every direction that mattered. He paid 2,000. He could not have given enough.